Welcome to DataBuckets Academy. In this episode, we'll show you how to build a sequence using the example of exploring a user's journey before they drop off. As you can see here, this is an example of a sequence visualized as a data table and a Sankey chart. The sequence feature in DataBuckets allows us to explore sets of user behaviors within our games and apps. Some common use cases include exploring user behavior before they drop off or after they make an in-app purchase. In this video, we'll also introduce some other features that build on the sequence tool, such as grouping users who share similar behavior patterns and calculating either the total duration of a sequence or the time between two specific events. So, the use case we're going to demo in this video is building a sequence based on the events that users triggered before they dropped off our app. This will help us answer a key question: what caused users to drop off? Here's the end result we're aiming to create. To achieve this, we'll start by going into Insights. From there, I'll create a new insight. Choose Insight, and then select the app or game I want to analyze, in this case, Awesome Demo App 2. Let's rename this insight to make it easier to follow later. When building a sequence, there are two main steps you should follow. First is defining the set of users you want to analyze. Second is building the sequence for those users. Let's start with the first part, choosing the user group. In this example, I want to analyze the sequence leading up to a drop-off. So the user group I'll focus on is users who dropped. After defining that group, we'll build a sequence to see what events they triggered before leaving the app. To begin, let's extract that group of users. In Step 0, I'll pick out users who had a first open event within the last 7 days. First, I'll find a field that represents users, which is user pseudo ID. Then I'll add a filter with the event name as first open. Last, I'll set the time range to 7 days and add to variable. This means I'm targeting users who opened the app for the first time in the past 7 days. Next, I'll identify users who dropped off as those haven't come back to the app within the past 3 days. To do that, I'll add a funnel step from Step 0. I'll start by identifying users who were active in the last 3 days, and then I'll exclude them. In the time range, I'll set it to 3 days. Label it as drop time and set as a variable. And remove the event name first open since it's no longer needed. Now I have two groups: users who had their first open event within the last 7 days, and users who were active in the past 3 days. The goal is to get users who installed the app in the past 7 days but have not been active in the last 3 days. These are our dropped users. So I'll create a funnel step, name it Drop Users. Set the time range to 7 days. Then filter to include users from Step 0 and exclude users from Step 1. This gives us exactly the group we want to analyze: users who downloaded the app within the last 7 days, but haven't returned in the past 3 days. Now that we've selected the group of users whose behavior we want to analyze, let's move on to the second part, building the sequence. To do this, I'll add a funnel step here. In this step, I'll work on the group of users we defined earlier in Step 2. And I'll name this step Sequence. Since we want to analyze a user's behavior, our subject will be user, and the field that represents each user is user pseudo ID. So I'll select that here. Besides analyzing sequences at the user level, you can also analyze them at the session level. To do that, simply select Session ID instead of user pseudo ID. It's the same concept, but instead of looking at the overall behavior of each user, you'll be looking at their behavior in each individual session. For this video, we'll focus on analyzing by user pseudo ID. Next, we need to define what represents the user's behavior. On this platform, that field is called event name. So, I'll click on Event Name and choose Sequence to start configuring it. You can actually build a sequence based on any field you want, not just event name. For example, in this sequence here, IAP Package Purchase Flow, I used pack name to explore what packages do users usually buy and in what order. So the idea is, you can build a sequence with any field that represents an action or behavior relevant to your analysis. Now that we've selected user pseudo ID and chosen to build the sequence by event name, let's move on to the configuration step. We'll start with the sequence type. Here you can choose between first or last sequence, meaning whether you want to look at the first set of events that users triggered or the last set of events. Next is the sequence length. This defines how many events you want to include in the sequence. The default value here is 10, but you can increase it all the way up to 10,000. Let's say I want to see 20 events. I'll enter 20 here. That means I want to look at the last 20 events each user performed before they dropped off. All right, let's submit and run the query. Here's what the output looks like. We have a data table with two columns. The first column is user pseudo ID, and the second is sequence event name, which matches the configuration we set earlier. For each user, we can now see the sequence of events leading up to their drop-off. In this example, since we selected 20, you'll see the last 20 events of each user. Each event in the sequence is separated by an arrow, showing the order in which they occurred. You'll also notice that some events are shown in orange and separated by a vertical bar. This indicates that these two events were sent to data buckets at the exact same timestamp, down to the millisecond. In other words, they're duplicate events. When there are too many duplicates, it can make your sequence harder to interpret. So, a good practice here is to keep only one event if two represent the same action or meaning. Now that we've generated the last 20 events for each user before they dropped off, we can start exploring these sequences. For a bit more context, the Awesome Demo App 2 is a wallpaper app. In this app, users can browse through different wallpaper options, preview their 3D effects, and download the ones they like. So, in this sequence, what we're trying to analyze is the set of events users triggered before they dropped off. Essentially, understanding what they did before leaving the app. However, in the event list, you'll notice that not all events are equally meaningful. Some events might not provide much insight into user behavior. Now, in this sequence, I noticed that some events aren't really relevant to the analysis. For example, here I have this Firebase campaign event. It's a default event that can be useful in some cases, but not in this one, since I'm focusing on understanding user behavior before they drop off. So, to make the sequence more focused, I'll exclude those irrelevant events. To do that, I'll open the sequence configuration and add a filter. In the filter, under Event Name, I'll select Event Not In, and then I can start typing in the events that I want to exclude. For example, I'll type Firebase campaign since it's not meaningful here. I'll also exclude Session Start because it's another default event and not part of the behavior I want to study. And I'll remove Screen Duration since it doesn't tell me much about user intent. Now when I run the sequence again, the output becomes much cleaner. There you go. Once I've excluded the events that don't add value, I can continue configuring the sequence. So far, we've selected the last 20 events of each user, but now I want to add an extra condition, a start item. Start item and end item defines a behavior chain that starts with a specific event or ends with a specific event. A common use case of these configurations include exploring users' behavior before an app purchase, where we set the end item as an app purchase. For today's example, let's say I want to understand what users do after reaching the home 3D screen and before they drop off. To do this, first, I'll add the parameter screen name to the field's bar. By adding this parameter, I can specify the event in the sequence, up to the parameter level. Then I'll add a condition where the sequence starts with the event GoToScreen, and for the parameter screen name, I'll enter Home3D. The slash in the middle separates the event and the parameter. You can add more parameters by adding a slash between them. I can also add a dot star before and after the start item. This is a regular expression, in other words regex pattern. It simply means match any sequence that appears one or more times. This helps in cases where there are duplicate events, those orange highlighted events we saw earlier. For example, you might have something in orange that says GoToScreen Home3D, followed by a vertical bar and session start. Without the dot star pattern, the system will not return those duplicates events. Now I'll click Submit, and we get the results. Even though we set the sequence length to 20, this sequence only returns 13 events. And that's because for these users there were only 13 events between GoToScreen Home3D and the drop-off event. You might also notice some blank sequences in the result. That means the system couldn't find any sequence that matched our configuration. In this case, the last 20 events that start with GoToScreen Home3D. So what I can do is adjust the configuration. I'll make the sequence longer. For example, set the length to 300. That way, we include more events and increase the chance of matching the sequence. But of course, a length of 300 might be too long to analyze visually. So, I can use the Keep Sequence Part option. Since I already defined a start item, I'll enable Keep Start Item and trim the length down to 10. This means I'm taking the last 300 events of each user. And in these events, I want the sequence to start with GoToScreen Home3D. Then trim it down to only 10 events from the last GoToScreen Home3D event, so my sequence is less lengthy. Let's submit and run that again. Now we get a cleaner result. Though there are still a few blanks, we can increase the sequence length a bit more, say 500, to capture additional events. Before we hit submit, there's one more setting worth noting: sequence length type. There are two options: short sequence and long sequence. Short sequence shows the shortest sequence that satisfies all your configurations. Long sequence shows the longest possible one. Usually, I'd select long sequence since it gives a fuller picture of user behavior. But in some cases, short sequence can be more useful. For example, if I want to see what users do right before their first in-app purchase, I can set the end item to IAP purchase and select short sequence. That way, I'll only see the behaviors leading directly to that first purchase, not every single one. If I selected long sequence, I'd see all the repeated IAP events, which might not be the main focus. And that's the difference between the two sequence length types. So now, I'll submit and run the query again. And there we have it. Apart from the parameter screen name that I just added, you can include any parameter for any event you want. For example, in this event shown here, I want to know which ad was shown and what type of ad format it was. I can simply click Edit Sequence. In Fields, I select Ads Type, and then run the sequence again to see the different ad types. As you can see in the results, there are events like Ad Show with ad formats such as interstitial and native. Personally, I only care about interstitial and rewarded ads, while native ads aren't really relevant for my analysis. So, to clean this up, I can go back to the configuration, create a rule that excludes anything containing the word native or banner. Basically, this means any event that includes native or banner in its parameters, regardless of what comes before or after. Then I submit. This is different from excluding by event name, because with exclude item, you can target specific parameter values within an event, which makes it very precise. Now, when I search for native or banner, there are no results, exactly what I wanted. So, that's how you create and configure a sequence. In part 2, we're going to demonstrate how you can see the exact timestamp of each event in the sequence, how to group users with similar behavior, and how to interpret the user journey with the Sankey chart. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our support. For more information, please refer to our documents linked in the description.